So now we're going to get another level down. We are going to, this afternoon, just introduce the next topic. Again, I know a lot of you are sophisticated, so I'll move through some of these intro slides quickly. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the trends that we're seeing specifically around census. We have some landscape research highlights already. We're still working with the Silicon Valley Community Foundation on our landscape analysis, but we do have findings to share. We have some strategic planning suggestions on how you can start to apply. What's the response to the dark web presentation we had in the morning? How do you respond to that? And then finally, we'll have some time for Q&A. We very much want to hear from you guys. What's resonating with you? What is this trigger in you in terms of challenges, opportunities? What do you need next? Either in training or in resources. I know the Silicon Valley Community Foundation is very interested in hearing that. We'll then have a little bit more training about 5 to 10 slides on SMS. We know that mobile is going to be critical, really probably the only way in some ways to really reach and persuade the hard to count. So we want to make sure that you guys start to get some underpinning on how to use mobile as part of your digital first strategy. And then finally, we have some audience and messaging exercises, provided that we have enough time. We've got a couple hours, so hopefully we should be able to get through it. And you should feel free, again, to take these exercises home with you as well. All right. So starting off, as you know, data collected by the census determines a lot of stuff, including the number of seats in the House of Representatives and the money that goes to local communities. And unfortunately, the Census Bureau is not going to really be able to reach out to hard-to-reach communities until early 2020 at the earliest. Okay, who knows what's actually going to happen? So it's really important for those of you to start a little bit earlier than that. So why are you needed? There's some of the things that we have heard out there, and we actually have a former Census Bureau member who will stay anonymous, but who has given us some of the inside dope about what's happening at the National Census Bureau, who said, there's a lot of assumption out there that things are going to be fine at the Census Bureau, assuming they have enough money. But in fact, they're actually behind the scenes. There's a lot, it's just pretty jacked, okay, to be frank, at the Census Bureau and the National, just as, with the rest of the administration. We know that they are understaffed. We know that there are leadership issues and communication issues. And so, there's a real concern for people who have been inside the Census Bureau, okay? This isn't just an external viewpoint. This is a voice from people who have been inside the National Census Bureau and know what's happening there, that their federal partnerships program is unlikely to be effective even with enough funding, which there's a real question given the budget that's just been submitted to Congress whether they will have enough funding. So a lot of that burden, unfortunately, is going to fall to you, basically, to help people feel like the census is safe and important to participate in. And just to quote this person, who again would like to remain anonymous, a lot of resources are going to be needed, and you're going to need to be really smart about your messaging. All right. So, our understanding in working with you is that this census messaging needs to come from the communities that are being counted by and for the people. And again, that starts to get into that, grassroots energy, that organizing and finding the influencers online, doing that social media monitoring to understand what the communities themselves are actually saying and sharing about the census. Of course, it is a nonpartisan. It's in the Constitution, just like voting and paying your taxes. It's in the Constitution that as a citizen of the United States, or just even living in the United States, just being present in the United States is part of the Constitution, our constitutional requirement that people participate it has become really politically charged just because of the America we're living in today. It's, of course, critical for fair representation, but there's a lot of fear out there about how this data might be used. While it's critical to get an accurate count, the sensitivity means that the digital aspect of this is really important too. So what can you do? Well, let's look at trends. But again, we believe that online and offline need to work together here. In a lot of organizations that we look at, offline, the digital, maybe it's communications, maybe it's just the digital team. They don't always have a relationship with the people who are out in the field, and that's a big mistake. In this current era, you really want your field people to feel pretty comfortable with digital so that they know, what the concerns are of the community when they're out there talking to people. They can actually be better informed and more persuasive. So let's look at some of the trends we're seeing across partner organizations. We're actually doing quite a lot of work across the United States, working with both large and small organizations who, like you, are focused on the census. So in terms of our look at SVCF specific partner organizations, what we've seen is there is a lot of success out there, right? And we did a survey of partner organizations, including some of you, to better understand, to better prep for today, but also just to understand, what's working well out there. So what we found was that, there's actually a good base. There's a foundation in email and social media. Folks are using SMS and some offline and traditional organizing tactics, but a lot of groups are eager to improve on that. They want to build on some of the success that they're having, particularly around messaging, video, influencers, and web. And folks are reaching both small and large hard-to-count communities, which is great, including Latinos, Asian Pacific Islanders, millennials, and some non-English speakers. So there is again, a foundation, but it's a question of how do we take that to scale. That's part of what we're trying to help with today. And then in terms of, digging deeper into that survey, some of the top themes that we saw were that, what are the big barriers to census outreach? The themes were there's not a lot of access to tech in some of the communities where folks are reaching. However, I would say that, when it comes to mobile, right? When we specifically talk about internet access on mobile, there is no digital divide. And in fact, you'll find that the hard to count are actually more likely to be using digital, but they're using their phones, right? Which is a very different, are your websites optimized for mobile? It's some of this is that basic. There is not necessarily a lot of access to language translation support. That's something that SVCF partner organizations like you said would be very helpful. How do you engage the hard to counts, especially those online, in an approachable and trustworthy way? How do you educate audiences on why it's so important? And finally, another macro theme that we've got was that orgs want more information just about the census itself, right? Just literally, what's in it, what are the questions, how does it benefit people to do it, and which digital platforms for which audiences are going to be the most critical. So that's some of what we heard from you. So I'm going to introduce Adriana Dakin from our team. She is one of our senior directors. Yes.
Digital strategists, yeah.
One of our senior digital strategists. But you should know that Adriana and I worked with a large team at Do Big Things to bring all of this data to you, and we're representing them. So I'm going to take it away.
Thank you. So we have landscape research highlights, and our team members used a variety of tools to put this together. So we want to give you, before we go into some strategic planning, we want to give you a basis of having a metrics-informed and data-backed approach about what we're already seeing. And then 6 months from now, it would be very different because more of you would be involved in tweeting and stuff about the census. So we're seeing that in California is very interested in this topic, the census. We're over-indexing. 14% of all tweets were about the census. sharing about the conversation compared to, which is 2% more than the US population at large. New York and Texas also, New York over-indexes, Texas under-indexes, and it's dominated right now by men who are 35 and older. Hopefully that will change. We see spikes in interest, especially in March 2018. There was the citizenship question that became a topic in the news, and so people were searching for this, and we saw a massive spike in interest online with people searching for data. We see in using Google Trends, which any of you can use as well, for census, California had a lower search interest in comparison to other states, but the citizenship question was one that comprised 2% of all the census-related inquiries. And over here on the next slide, you'll see that California is super interested in this question. It's one that could lead to a lower census count. Here's some data to do some density mapping on coastal queries. Some of the largest drivers of search interest are in the DC metropolitan area, but when you're isolating search interest in just California, you'll see that the more diverse coastal areas, you'll see those are darker purple on the map. They tend to query about the census more than their inland peers, and the citizenship question was the #1 query this past fall. This is a map from the sources down here, Census Hard to Count Maps 2020. So just wanted to zoom in on this particular area, the counties down here, to show that there are some hard to count communities. You already know about this, but you'll see this huge area where like up to 60% of people don't return the census in the mail. And then there's other pockets of people not sending in census information. So it's pretty widespread, the fact that there are hard to count populations around the whole Bay Area. We've been doing research on hashtags about the census, and here we see some frequency. We want to encourage you guys to use hashtags, and it's a way that for organizations and individuals to get involved in wider conversations that are going on about the topic, and so that even if you only have, say, 1,000 followers, you can get into conversations that are much bigger and more people will see what you're writing about. So these are ones that SVCF actually identified, and we were looking for just how many people have been tweeting, which is quite a bit, but it will be more. What are you laughing about?
Our 26 tweets.
Oh, okay.
We're just starting.
Glad you're starting.
Using 2020, right? Like,
We use
that's
both.
what
We use
you-
both.
yeah.
We
Oh,
use
you
all
use
of them.
both.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So who's tweeting? These are used across the country with the exception of SMC Census, which is only used in California, of course. And the authors of the tweets range across Twitter users, but hashtag census is being used by government agencies the most, while the others are used, by more broad parts of the population. Hashtags by city in California. So here are the top 10 cities that produce tweets with these hashtags this year, January and February. Los Angeles comes out on top, closer to the southern border, and San Francisco next, Sacramento, San Diego, etc. So interest is, we see it along the coast in particular. We took the top 4 hashtags, hashtag 2020 census, etc., and we searched for frequency of use amongst 12 philanthropic partners. And these are partners that tweeted a combined 274 times in January and February, so 2 months using these hashtags. And I'd say let's increase this. Like with more organizations tweeting about it, that number will rise. So among these philanthropy partners, the Latino Community Foundation, the California Community Foundation, and Northern California Grantmakers were the top 3 in terms of tweeting using these census hashtags. And SVCF came in 5th with 37 census-related tweets using those hashtags. The top hashtags used by the organizations in census-related tweets are these, and I don't have to read them all, but you'll get this in your data, and I'd encourage you guys to make lists of the hashtags you want to keep following, and you can set up streams where you're feeding yourselves, like in Hootsuite or something, streams with these hashtags, so you're keeping up with conversations and educating yourself on what people are saying about the census ongoing. We looked up the top 10 California Census Twitter influencers. These are people who are ranked as the most prolific influencers in California by their volume of tweets related to census and Census 2020. So these are the most active authors in a conversation in the last year. So if you're interested, these are some that you might want to follow. And you can see SVCF is there amongst the top 10-ish. Okay, now the top 24 partners talking about the census. We wanted to get a little more, thank you. We wanted to get a little more broad so that you can look at more people, more organizations to follow, and give you and show you how they can be ranked for influence. So you'll see on the right, like for example, number 1, Public Policy Institute of California, ranked at 13.5. So that's an influence score that measures the amount of engagement that an author receives or an organization receives, and measures the percentage of their posts that mention or retweet the user within a search's time frame. So it's great to have a higher influencer score and can be helpful for sorting through the masses of influencers that are talking about this, and more over time as we approach 2020. So this is the list that continues, and sorry about the overlay there that's showing up, but in the original doc you won't see that happening. Now, before we move into strategic planning, I just took a snapshot searching for Census 2020 and showing the imagery that people are using for Census 2020. You can see it's pretty dull. There aren't faces like from real life and real communities. I think this is an example of what could change by doing messaging that's better and more individual for communities and more inspiring, like with individual stories and real people, and how census funding that comes from census affects preschools, lunch programs, etc. There's real impacts, and that doesn't really show in the imagery about the census currently. So onwards to strategic planning, and Cheryl, you're taking the first section on audience.
Thanks, Adriana. Any questions on any of that, though, before we head into what are you going to do about it? No? Yes, go ahead. Yeah, Bernie, go ahead.
I noticed that Census 2020 and 2020 Census were the top 2 hashtags. So I guess I'm just wondering, is it better to use one over the other? Is there some strategy in combining and all trying to use one so that we keep pushing that one? I have no idea.
Sure. Well, you should definitely use the ones that people are using, right? Like trying to force your own hashtag. It's useful, but ultimately you're just going to reach fewer people. There's already a conversation going on, and those people are tending to use either 2020 census or Census 2020. So you could use both. Just so that you're getting into the bloodstreams of both of those conversations. You can still actually sort of add your hashtag and say, look, if you want specific information about our locality, follow this hashtag. But ultimately, right, if your goal is to start to, reach a wider audience, you're going to want to use, the most popular one. One of those had almost 50% more Twitter action than the other, and you're likely to see similar hashtag action, like that same hashtag 2020 census is likely to be one of the more popular ones, for example, on Instagram, right, or on Facebook. So important to keep that in mind. But yeah, you can. I would experiment, right? What's great about social media is that you get real-time results, right? To understand, like, okay, how many more people saw. Right, and this is something I was talking with Diane about earlier, was, you actually have a ton of data that's available to you for free on the dashboards behind the scenes, whether it's Facebook Insights or the Twitter dashboard. I know that some of that data, there's so much data there now, you might say, oh, it's overwhelming and I don't know what's really important to look at, and that's something we should talk more about potentially in another training. But at the same time, those are AI powered and they're more or less real time. So you can see pretty quickly, in your experiments, okay, if we use this hashtag and this content, we get X results. If we use this one, or if we use both, we get more results, right? And so this is a great time now before 2020 to actually start doing, essentially some experimentation, just to understand what does and doesn't work with your audience. And again, that will change over time. And so really, not just, again, hope is not a strategy, not just putting stuff out there and hoping it happens, but actually looking at the results, right, in your insights and dashboard is going to help you determine your strategy as it goes forward. Great question. All right. Any other questions before we move on? And we're going to have more time for dialogue, but I just wanted to take a quick pause. No? All right. Well, Adriana, I'll head into strategy. So we've got strategic planning. We want to, as you said in this morning, look, all of that is really helpful information, but now what, right? How do I actually approach the situation? So let's talk about the communications trifecta, the trifecta 3. So, and we're going to talk in more detail, but just to give you an overview, there are 3 key areas that we think should guide your digital strategy in general. And they are audience, message, and action. I'm going to talk about audience in more detail in a minute, and then Adriana is going to cover message and action. And then we're going to do some fun, cool exercises in the afternoon before you leave to dig deeper. But in terms of audience, what are the demographics and psychographics of the people you're trying to reach? You're not trying to reach everybody all the time in your community. There are some specific people, and the more specific that you get, the better. In terms of message, content is really important. If it's boring you, it's probably going to bore your audience. And so, how can you make sure that your strategy is actually meeting people where they are and is truly engaging? And then finally, action. What ladder of engagement do you want people to start to travel on? What's their journey from, I have some questions about the census, to I'm ready to fill out the census? And why would they want to do it with you? All right. So in terms of, high level, right, big picture, first, in terms of your strategy, you want to actually understand who's your first target audience. Who are you really trying to reach? Are you trying to reach Asian Pacific Islanders who speak, a specific language and live in a specific neighborhood? Great. That's a great place to start. You also want to figure out who the community influencers and ambassadors are. In some cases, they might be faith leaders. The faith community, the clergy, et cetera, they are actually very much understand how online influence works, and they may be able to teach you. You also want to then, for message, work with local influencers to make sure you're resonating with folks and addressing the frequently asked questions. You want to be able to be culturally sensitive and also, again, be responsive to what is and isn't working, using the language and imagery, again, through testing. And I would say I'm always wrong with, when I'm like, I bet that this message and this image is going to be the thing that people like, but let's try let's have a bunch of different variations. And there are tools that allow you to do, hundreds potentially of variations. I'm almost never right. Instead, what I rely on is understanding, okay, let's let the community decide. Let's figure out what the audience really works and try some options, sample it, and then go with the one that is actually working. So for example, you can actually run a digital ad campaign, relatively low dollars, put a few $100s down. Instead of printing out some pamphlets, okay, don't do that. Okay, put that money on some ads, run 10 different versions of an image and a message. Within 24 to 48 hours, you'll see which one works and which one doesn't. Shut off the ones that don't work, put another $300 on the one that does. You will reach 100 times more people than you would trying to pamphlet, okay, and a piece of paper that someone will toss immediately, right? This is the way to play the game now. And then finally, action. You want to offer trust building that is both online and offline. You can run webinars, right? You can run a webinar and invite people online to come and then record that. That then becomes content you can use over and over again to help, spread the message as people share it. People love, again, to share video. All right, so let's dig a little deeper into audience. How do you build, this relationship? How do you even first start to identify and get specific with your audience? And then how do you actually engage with influencers and what are called micro-influencers? So first off, demographics and psychographics. There are all kinds of demographic information. Again, you guys are pretty sophisticated. You probably know quite a lot about this, but I would give your attention to psychographics. This is often where people may or may not factor in, not just demographics, specifically, okay, I am, 37, I live in this neighborhood, but, what's their propensity to actually, where are they starting from in terms of the census? Have they filled out a census before in 2010, but now they're freaked out by fake news? Or, have they never filled it out and they are curious, but they've got some concerns? Or are they just like, nope, don't want to do it, don't want it to go away, right? Where are they starting from? That's really important because you're going to have different communication strategies depending on where someone is starting and where they are on that journey. So, personas. How many of you know what a persona is already? A couple of people. Okay, so personas were actually developed in the corporate marketing world. And it's a really important concept to consider. Personas are very useful for audience targeting and messaging. Essentially, you're creating a story about a person. It's not a real person, but it's like a composite of a real person. And as you get really focused on this specific person, it's like you're engaging in a dialogue and trying to persuade this actual, composite person, which very much tends to change. Studies show how you dialogue and make your messaging a lot more effective. You'll want to narrowcast. Again, you're not trying to reach everybody all the time in your community. There are some specific people that you want to start out with. So you're narrowcasting and you're segmenting your audience to give them different content, and you should at least start with 3 to 4 different personas. Those personas may change as you have some success with certain communities or as you learn more about those communities, but 3 to 4 is a really great place to start. So here is an example of a persona. Renee Garcia is not a real person, but she looks like a real person, right? You might run into this person at the CVS. She's a social worker at a racial justice organization. Potentially, she is both African American and Latina. She speaks 2 languages. She's 30. She's doing okay in terms of income. She lives in San Jose. She has not participated, or maybe she's likely to participate in the census, but she has some friends and family who might not. And there's a quote from her. She's excited maybe to get help, and to get help, she's a potential influencer, right? So down here we've got her goals and interests, right? Her motivations. What are her challenges and fears? What are her preferred channels of communicating with her friends and family? You want to actually create a persona like this for 3 to 4 different types of people that you're trying to reach, in your community. So, how do you use them? So you're trying to put together a social media campaign. What would Renee think about this photo? Would this be like, yes, this is great, yes, queen? Or would she say, that's boring, no? How would she react to the message? Is this interesting? Is this the kind of thing that a Renee, someone I might know or should know, would pass on? Is this the channel? We already know that someone like Renee prefers Instagram. Are we trying to reach her via email? How's that going to go? What do you think, right? It's just starting to really think in a different way about Renee and her life and the type of person she represents that you're trying to reach. What can we do to convince her? What kinds of messages might convince her? How do we test that? And then how do we change it depending on how the Renees we're trying to reach actually respond? And then how can I talk about her? How can I actually engage in a dialogue with someone like a Renee to really understand, how to activate her? They don't trust government agencies. They don't trust nonprofits. They don't trust the Silicon Valley. community foundation. They don't trust companies. Okay, despite your best efforts, I know you're not evil people, but these days people just aren't really sure what is and isn't happening. And so you're at the center here. You want to place yourself in the center around an orbit of peer organizations like you have here today, influencers and micro-influencers, which we talked about, not necessarily the area Winters, but the Renee Garcias, right, who might have 500 followers but are important within her sphere. And of course, everyday friends and families, the kind of people that a Renee Garcia might be able to influence. Influencer engagement. You guys are smart. I'm not going to read out all this data points. Again, it's heavily used in the corporate world. It works. The reason UGC stands for user-generated content. What you want ultimately is not necessarily you. Ultimately you guys are small, right? There's only so much content you can pump out on your own. You need to activate your community to help you get the message out through what we call user-generated content, them making videos, them taking your message and reformulating it for their audience. So we know that user-generated content is much more effective than any of the content that you would ever produce. How do you start to shift your strategy to encourage that, to find it, and then to lift it up and encourage more creation? So here's an example of some of the influencers that we've already found that are out there in California right now. These are just examples. There are many, many more. But as we mentioned, right now, the dominant audience talking about the census are older, sort of middle-aged and older white guys, which is cool. No disrespect, but in terms of reaching the hard-to-count communities, that's not necessarily, the demographic and psychographic we're trying to reach. So, here are some examples of the types of people who live, in Oakland, Palo Alto, who live in California, who could help. And they have a lot of followers, 52,000 followers in Oakland. Aura's a big dog. Not only do you want to look at Aura, and look at, her bio and her content to plan an approach, to talk to her, look at her followers. There's probably a good chance that she has at least 5 to 10 other followers who might live even in your district, in your, locality that can help you, that you can also reach out to. So how do you reach these and start talking to these micro-influencers? Well, again, they tend to be considered, and this is research, it's not just me saying it, they tend to be, the micro-influencers tend to be more trusted than, say, the Jay-Z's, of the world, especially among the hard-to-count, right? Because of the role that they play in their everyday lives in curating, content. So you want to follow and support. Once you find an influencer, make sure you're following them, let them know that you're following them, and invite them to events, whether online or offline. You want to make sure that you are posting content about news that might impact that influencer. What would Renee, think about this? And tag Renee, if she's an influencer or Aura, in that post so that she's aware that that's happening. And maybe she might share it after the 3rd time that you've tagged her, right? You want to build a census ambassador program and invite them. Again, you saw this morning where you would be surprised how powerful it is for an influencer, even if they have 100 times more followers than you give them a credibility, right, that they can't pay for. So, that relationship with you actually gives them both a psychic boost, but also a credibility boost with their followers. Invite them to be community ambassadors. Make them feel good. Make them feel important. And provide, it becomes a dialogue. You want to provide training. You want to invite them to calls. You want to add them to webinars that equip them with the information that they need to influence their communities. Again, they're going to remix it. Right? They're going to put it in their own vernacular, their own language maybe. What you want to do is observe what they do with your content, right? How are they remixing it? Then you can start to remix your own content to make it more palatable to them, right? It starts to become a feedback loop for you. And then finally, again, you want to let them take the lead. In fact, with this Census Ambassador program, one of the things you can do is just be honest with them and say, look, we have a challenge ahead of us. We want to reach people in your community, but we need to know what they think about the census now and what types of messages, images, et cetera, links are going to be most helpful. What do you think? Right? Co-create, plan your campaign with these ambassadors and micro-influencers. So here are a few more influencers that we found. These are the top 10 California fashion and lifestyle influencers. These, you might notice that these are bigger numbers, right, than the community activists we just talked about, who are already potentially interested. These are folks who have millions or hundreds of thousands, not 50,000, that was the biggest one before. These are folks who have 3 million followers. That's because they're talking about lifestyle and fashion and food, which, is important. And in some cases, they fall into some of the demographics and psychographics that we're interested in. People look to them for tips on how to live a better life. Living a better life includes filling out the census. Right? Okay, so how do you reach these extremely important tastemakers who are going to help you make the census look cool, like way cooler than it looks now? So by far, what we have found and others have found is that fashion, beauty, food, lifestyle bloggers tend to be the most influential on social media as activists for two reasons. Again, partly, they are tastemakers, right? The whole point of following these is to try to look better, try to feel better, try to eat better, try to exercise better. Whereas an activist might just be pelting you with information and responding, to stuff they saw on MSNBC. And there's a group of people who are very engaged around that. And there's a group of people who just want to know what yoga pants they should wear today. Okay? Again, no disrespect. People are just trying to get through the day, but this is important, right? Because those are the very people, in some cases, that you need to reach with this message. So, and what studies show is that, again, they are willing. They're willing and able to talk about political or civic messaging. It's not that if they're not doing it, it's not because they're not interested. It's because they haven't been approached by people like you. They're as engaged and interested in what's happening in the world as you are. So, what's key? Well, consumers very much, as we mentioned, want truth and authenticity. They are, beauty influencers in particular are some of the folks that we want to reach. Their audiences are young, they're minority, they're very uncertain about what the government can do for them. You want to invest in influencers potentially with dollars or, an honorary role. But this requires reconfiguring your current communication staff to make it part of someone's job, okay, to talk to fashion and lifestyle bloggers. Who does that at your job now? Anybody? Does anybody have anybody who's doing this? Yeah, okay, right? So, this is the real talk that I'm trying to have with you, right? That this is now someone's job at your organization, is to find these people, yes, and talk to them about the census. Now, as we mentioned, sometimes some kind of compensation is needed. Most of them want to do the right thing. Compensation can look like a lot of different things. It could be a t-shirt, it could be a sticker, it could just be a reciprocal mention. But again, they have a bigger audience than you do. But a mention from you, even though you have a smaller audience, it gives them some credibility. There are lots of ways, give them movie tickets. Right? Again, it's probably cheaper to give someone who has 3 million followers a movie ticket, 2 movie tickets, than it would be to print out a bunch of flyers that everybody's just going to throw away, right? All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Adriana to talk about message.
And these last two subsections of the strategy are shorter. And then we'll have a nice discussion. So I want to also start by saying these are like straw man or straw woman ideas, and we want to get your input so that we finalize the strategy with what's real for nonprofits and other organizations. Okay, so we came up with some message, tone, concept ideas, and you see some blank bullet points down there just to symbolize that this is to be continued. Next week when we get back to this, we'll have had your input. So some ways to think about message tone concepts. Like hopefully you'll be working with messengers to come up with what's the message you want to share, and like what imagery, like talking with specific people like a faith leader or something. But you can come into it with some prep work on thinking about, we want our outreach about Census 2020 to be engaging and inspiring, to be human, personable, approachable, to be super accessible to individuals. You really don't want to, you got to let go of that nonprofit wonkiness and think about how people speak regularly. Like, how would a 7th grader understand this? And even though you might not be speaking to a 7th grader, that is the type of level that people can really like hold on to and remember and understand, like shorter sentences, forget the jargony words. You want it in everyday language to be inclusive and respectful of everybody and to be memorable. So you can say, think about, what are the ways we want to speak? We want to speak in our audience's language, like Spanish or whatever it might be. You want to speak with respect for how busy people are, using vivid imagery, use accessible words. Perhaps you want to set in stone as part of your organization that you want to be really honest about the census with the situation, like fear about the census is real, that the overall political climate is distressful right now. And so, you want to show that you're not disregarding that, and that the citizenship question has not been decided yet. It's going to the Supreme Court. So you want to do this together with individuals, but you can come into it with these overall concepts in mind. All right, so here's a framework to think about what your core message is, and maybe you'd want to print it when you get this deck and work it through with your organization, because you want to have in mind, what's this moment right now in the real world? What's that wider cultural moment, the zeitgeist that's happening? Who are your competitors who might be competing for time with people's attention? What are your strengths? Because you always want to be building on strengths, and at the intersection of all that is your core message. Another approach is a message triangle, where you're thinking through ahead of time before you're really going out to work with influencers who could be your messengers and ambassadors, is thinking about what are all the problems, what are all the opportunities and the solutions. So for example, as we know, the Census Bureau is under capacity to get the job done fully in all the states. People don't trust government. They're likely to we're likely to get an inaccurate count, which could mean less representatives and funding. You can read the rest. We'll just move right along here to some core message ideas. So these are just kind of straw man ideas that we started coming up with, and we want to get your opinion on it. But you'll see that this is written in short sentences and kind of regular speak. Community might be the longest word, or representative. We don't want to be talking like we are nonprofit people. We want regular language, so it's like your voice in your community counts. Why? Filling out the census next year will help bring the right resources to our schools and important social programs. You could say there's a lot of fear around the census for undocumented communities, because you want to be real about how you're talking about this. But as of right now, there has been no decision if a citizenship question will be added. In the past, this question has not been included. There are dozens of, it goes on, but it's in regular language. You can say if people are not counted, states like California can lose a representative in the House. They can also lose funding, etc. We can get down to like nitty-gritty what happens in daily lives. We can bring home the 2020 census importance by saying classrooms will be overcrowded, hospitals will be understaffed, more children will lack health care. We want to make it real in language and imagery. Oh, sorry for that XX, huh? I better add some words there. So action. This is the third component of the communications trifecta. And this is only, I think, 2 slides, so have hope. We're going to get to the discussion in a moment. So this is a ladder of engagement, and we find it very useful because at the bottom you see the mass of people who are basically observing what's going on. They're seeing news and information, and they're getting acquainted with the topic by seeing your things. The next level, when people get more engaged with you in this ladder of engagement, they might be signing up or following to be in touch with your efforts. If they're endorsing, that's great. They're taking more action with you. And they might be letting friends know that they stand behind the cause and asking their friends to do the same. And then moving on up the ladder for contributing, this might be donating money or time to get out the count, sharing a personal story, maybe a short video, 30-second video about the importance of census that can be shared in like blogs and social media, etc. So they're giving something of value. Then moving up, owning is the category where they're taking responsibility for a piece of the action. Maybe this is going on a radio show, but it could be many different things where they're, owning what's being done. And then lastly, this is where you want to have some leaders that you're developing to spread word of mouth. They are serving as community ambassadors to get out the count, and they're generating new ways to speak with people, and they're being creative and actually getting some stuff done more than your team can do on its own. Okay, so this has been long, but just want to give a recap of some strategic priorities before we head into the discussion to tie it all together. So basically, we need to shift gears from the current government-y and formal messaging to culturally relevant messaging created by and for communities. I know somebody had a question about what's an example of some bad messaging that's happened. One that was culturally insensitive was by a consulting agency that wanted to target Native Americans, and they used it with teepee imagery, and now this is the 21st century, so that was fairly insensitive to what people are experiencing now among Native American communities. So it would help to have messaging created by the communities so they're more sensitive to what's right and what's wrong. We want to build trust with local communities. We want to address real fears. We want to be culturally sensitive and in tune with local popular culture and broader national culture. And then we want to be using digital platforms to reach and motivate influencers. We can reach more people this way, and then those people, digital platforms are just a communication method. They're real people. They go back home and talk with their families and relatives, so word of mouth spreads. And now we want to get your input. This is an important part of the process. The strategic plan isn't done, and we're ready to get a sense for does this make sense to you? What would you add? What does not make sense for communities? And I'll document.
Yes, so you might see this change either live or after we'll restore it. So we have some thoughts in the back, but you can go ahead and read before I know you're ready. You're ready, girl. I can see it. But just, we can see the discussion. Does any of this make sense to you? Does this feel?
Get out of present mode in order to see
Oh,
it.
okay. Yep. Let me do that. That's what I thought. I'll get out of present so that we can see it. Yeah. So now you'll be able to see. We'll update this live. And again, these decks will be shared with you. But also, does this make sense? What would you add? What resources do you need beyond this? We've dropped a lot of ideas and science on you. But, what do you actually need to start to implement, or what are the challenges that you're faced? And, are there things that you think, look, this dog won't hunt in my community. This is what I actually need. So let's start in the way back there. Go ahead. Yeah.
So I really appreciate the presentation and all the information in it. I wholeheartedly agree with the statement that the messaging ought to be created by and for the communities. The question is, here we are trying to do the right thing. What about the Census Bureau? How are they moving? Are they following these things in terms of coming up with their own messaging or what? Because 10 years ago, like I've spoken many times before, the translation of the Vietnamese was so bad, so scary, that it reminded people of years under the communist government.
Wow.
And it's like, for example, instead of saying population tabulation, they used population investigation. And so,
Awesome.
And by the time we aired that, it was like, sorry, we already printed everything. So I'm wondering whether the Census Bureau is following these guidelines.
Yeah, so, again, we had I could go back to that slide where it's like, abandon all hope, ye who enter here, okay? Like, you understand that, not to get political, but, it's just a fact, okay? Like, the Census Bureau is under the Trump administration, okay? Like,
I forgot about that.
I mean, I don't, and this is not even, I mean, taking it out of political context, like, it is a known fact, right, that, the Trump administration has been slow to hire people, right, has tended to prefer funding, military and border security over, citizen services. So, like, we know for a fact from, essentially informers from former Census Bureau folks that, like, it's just a complete cluster frack over there, okay? Like you should expect less than, like, a lower quality than 2010, and what you're telling me was that was bad. So, like, you should expect it to not only be worse, but maybe evil. Okay, like counter to what you are trying to do, and I'm not trying to be a jerk about it. Like, this is, this is just the reality of the situation. So, that makes it even more important to bring the community in. Look, Wikipedia is a great example, okay, of, seeing an issue and saying, okay, we need to tap into the community. Wikipedia is built, and it is the largest human document in civilization. It is the largest document created in human civilization. That's pretty impressive, right? And it's all volunteer. Nobody gets paid to edit those pages. And a lot of the pages that were translated, it was originally in English, they called on the community and said, we want to, well, and the community actually surged forward, if you talk to the Wikimedia Foundation and said, this is amazing, but I want to translate this into, my local language. And they said, okay, let's find some volunteers who can help do it. Like, you can probably reach out to the community, if you find the right influencers who can spread the word and say, look, this is what we need. What we need is to take this and turn it into Vietnamese. Who's with me, right? There are people who want to help, but you have to give them, beyond just sharing, right? Beyond just sharing the content, there are people out there who want to step forward to help, but they've got to know what you need, and you have to actually reach out to them. And that means also, again, reaching into corners that you may not have tapped before, because this is a census like we have never seen before in American history that will challenge us.
So I totally buy that we're not the influencers, right? And that people aren't necessarily going to trust an intermediary like mine or a foundation. But I still think that I would challenge the assumption that it's not the nonprofits in this room, some of them the teachers and the social workers. I think they do have, especially with certain parts of the hard-to-count communities. So what is the kind of channel for teachers and caseworkers? I mean, are we still talking about Twitter? Or, like, how do we embed that into this? Or should I just let go of that, thought that they're influencers? Do I have to, I don't know.
Yeah, no, actually, that's a great idea, is to, teachers and social workers, right, people don't necessarily see them as, you, right, a faceless, to them, a faceless organization filled with bureaucrats. I know that you are beautiful human beings filled with dignity and integrity, but the community doesn't necessarily know that. They don't know you. They do know their caseworker. They do know their teacher. That person doesn't represent necessarily a government. That person is a human being to them. And so, you can undertake a survey of the teachers and your social workers. How many of you have, are active on Twitter or Instagram? How many followers do you have? Do a survey just to figure out, and then start to weed, okay, these are the people who actually have pretty strong followers and are willing, to carry this message. It's not hard to share a post, if it's mostly done for them, right? They'll be willing to help you figure out who those people are. The other thing you can do is train them and say, look, we need help. Here's why. We want to bring resources into our school. We want to bring resources, to the folks who need it most. But in order to do that, people really need to fill out the census. Like, it's actually, like, this year, more vital than ever before, again, in human history. Will you come to this training on how to, build how to use the hashtag 2020 census, hashtag to reach people, within your community? Yeah, and you'd be surprised. People are hungry for this, not just to help their community, but for them. They know that these are important skills for their career in the future. Great question. Yes?
This is great with the coordination of resources here with the nonprofits and stuff. But this is great because Silicon Valley, the foundation, has set this training thing up. Is there an avenue where the group can get representatives to the census for like the state of California to work with the people that are actually going to be sending out the documents? Has there been a movement? Because the governor's office is pretty amenable to what we want to do because he doesn't want to lose funding or that type of stuff. And I can put my other hat on. I'm director of the fire district in Menlo Park, which is southern San Mateo County. And since we have a federal task force there too, we can lose federal grant money. And now grants are starting to come due again. And we can see, and I'm sure you're seeing it too, the slowness of those renewals or those extra funding sites that used to be continuous. So is there like a secondary group that's working with the governor's office, maybe under the Department of State for our area here?
I would toss that to our Census Bureau friends here.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
I think the answer is
Oh, you're not? Oh, sorry.
No, we're County of San Mateo.
Oh, County of San Mateo,
City
sorry.
San Mateo.
Yeah.
But we do work very closely with our state legislators and their aides. So Senator Pan.
Well, so do I, but that's not the answer to my question.
Okay.
I mean, they'll tell me anything to keep me happy. What I want to know is if there's a secondary step that this primary group has another group that's actually at the table, because they're going to have to coordinate this thing.
You have to coordinate this thing.
Yeah, and do you have any thoughts? I mean, I know you guys have done some thinking about this.
I mean, I'm hoping I'm understanding the question, but because we have Nick Kawada here, who's the census coordinator for Santa Clara County and Aparna with San Mateo County, they're leading the complete count committee work. Are you familiar with that? Is that?
No, that's why I'm just asking.
Yeah, so maybe, I don't know if you want to mention, maybe Nick, each of our counties have a complete count committee that's, I think, talking about what your question is, like coordinating the work on the ground locally.
Yeah, and precisely that. And we've broken it down into different levels. So there's the Federal Bureau, Census Bureau, that will be issuing its own set of messaging and outreach activities. Then there's the state complete count office, and then below that are the local partners. So like the counties are involved, some of the cities are also involved with that, and then we've all created our complete count committees, which are created with the idea of partnership with all the different organizations and faith-based institutions, everyone at the table to plan, and then to also hopefully fund for outreach in 2019.
Okay. I was just back for a review. I was just back for the legislative review of the new bills that are coming out, and I posed the question that you said, is there going to be something that, let's say the federal census comes out with their results and we lose a congressional seat because it's not counted? Is there a way that we as the state of California can question that and appeal to that? I know there's some type of system, but even Manny Diaz, who's the new governor's chief of staff, didn't even know that answer, so maybe you can help me.
So I'm going to venture to guess if you're talking about post-census
Right.
and questioning whether or not our state actually had an accurate count, that would be litigation. So hypothetically, if we go down that road, it would be the state of California suing the administration for not successfely executing a fair and accurate count. And so that would be, the onus would then be on the state, the Attorney General's office to pursue that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it has. Thank you.
Okay, a couple more questions. More question?
Me?
Yeah.
No, I guess I was just thinking that,
Bring
like,
the mic over a little bit, please.
hi everyone. I guess I was just thinking that with all of us in the room, that this is a good opportunity for us to maybe think about how we might want to do a coordinated social media outreach hashtag campaign. Like, since we're all representing like a region, So I just wanted to put that out there. I don't know if we can maybe like put together some type of like a follow-up meeting where we can discuss our ideas. I know we all have a lot of questions around like what the actual content strategy will look like for us in executing outreach for the census. So I just wanted to put that on the table.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's great feedback for SBCF. Any other questions or just comments? Yes, we got one. Jeremy.
Great, thank you. That was a very informative training. I really liked. I really was surprised to see the influence of the influencers and information around psychographics and how to get people and address some of their concerns. We've been working with community members and getting seeing how they're feeling about the census and working with stakeholders on the various complete count committees. But we've also been talking around the importance of messaging about making this an empowerment moment for community members on the ground. Not just a transactional period, that this is a two-way, and that this is kind of a two-way dialogue, and that giving families and giving community members that, by giving them the empowerment that they have a role to play to shape the state and the region that they have.
You know what I love about that is it goes all the way to the beginning of our of our talk. You remember that first slide where it's like, look, more people voted in a midterm than the last 100 years, right? Because now people really treasure the right to vote, I think, in a way that they didn't. They understand that voting really matters and makes a difference in how our, what our government looks like and how it behaves. I think that similar with the census, people have really forgotten what the census is and does, and how important it is in terms of the vitality it brings to our communities. This is a moment, in a way, even though I know we've talked about some of the dark, disturbing underbelly of this, the bright side, right? Turning away from the shadow, turning to the light is what an opportunity to show people through just filling out a simple form, what they can do for their to have better fire engines and police and schools and roads, right? The things that people are most concerned about right now. How do we get more money into our schools? Fill out the census, right? That's how we get our kids a better education. So I love it. That's great. That's great messaging to test. Any other feedback, thoughts, comments, desires? Okay. We've got a little bit more content, and then we're going to head into the exercises, because you're probably sick of hearing Adriana and I talk, so soon it'll be your turn. Oh, whoops, I need to get back to standby. Okay. And thank you, Adriana, for taking notes. Here's more of that feedback that we tried to capture. So much great feedback. Look at that. Okay, so let's talk about SMS and social media. Sorry, just pulling up my notes here. All right. So here's what we're going to cover quickly. Just got about another 10 or so slides. Don't worry, and then we're going to stop talking, I promise, and we'll have more time for your questions. But, in terms of the hard to count populations, we want to really focus on SMS and mobile texting. We already talked about why. These are other things to really keep in mind. One of the things that we're finding in some of our work with other folks who are working on census is that they're not necessarily paying much attention to their Google Analytics. How many of you are aware that you have Google Analytics running on your websites? Any of you? Some of you. That's pretty good, pretty good. For those of the rest of you, it probably is happening, and you may or may not have access to actually review that data. But there's a lot of great things that you can see in Google Analytics, including how many people are actually trying to access your site and your content via mobile. And what is the growth trajectory of that? Because in part, that can help you make the case for, look, a third of the folks coming to our site are actually trying to access this via mobile. We need to actually make these sites better mobile optimized and have a real mobile program. You would be surprised how many people are trying to access your content via mobile. You can also see over time who are the top referrers. Where does the traffic come from? Because again, it's understanding what are we putting out there and then what's happening so that you can double down on the things that are working and stop wasting time on the things that don't. So, texting is growing. It's the predominant way that most people dialogue, including the hard to count. Just about everyone in America, no matter how rich or poor, has a mobile phone. It's just, it's the world we're living in today, and all of those receive text messages. The average American sends or receives 41 text messages per day. What I can tell you is that when you're talking about younger people, teenage, it can be hundreds to thousands a day. Right, which is important to understand. Again, you don't want to be a raindrop in a thunderstorm. You want to make sure that you're actually able to do this, to reach those folks. And, of course, while it may reach a smaller audience than email now, that audience is growing fast in terms of, the number of people you might have on your mobile list versus your email list. What we are finding is that nonprofits are actually sending at least one mobile message per month per mobile subscriber. That's good. It's a place to start. But again, is that really, given that we know that they send 41 a day on average? You sending one a month, where's that going? How far is that? It's not enough. You're not filling the feed, right, with enough content for them to share or to get the education, the resources, the information they need.
Cheryl?
Yeah.
Is there time for questions now?
Do you have a question on that?
I was going to ask, how would we deal with the fact, we don't want to overburden people with text messages. We don't want them to unsubscribe from our list. So how would you suggest us mitigating unsubscriptions?
Yeah. So the question was, but thank you, Anne. The question was, we don't want to overwhelm people with messages. How do we make sure? I mean, look, some of this is experimentation. I would say one a month for email is probably plenty, and I think that's partly why people are kind of borrowing from best practices on email to best practices on mobile, even though that's not a one-to-one, right? It's not, we're talking apples and oranges. I would say it does depend on what you're trying to get them to achieve, right? And the true urgency of the matter. So I would say for mobile, for something like this, as long as it's different, you want to mix it up, right? It's really important for that content to look different, a little bit every time. You may have 5 different types of content, right? Like one is a link, one is a survey, one is a story, right? One is an ask, etc., right? Make sure you're cycling through that so it's not boring and so it's not like, oh, they keep sending me the same thing over and over again. Stop, right? You want to observe your churn and burn, and manage it by creating compelling, interesting, varied content. But I would say probably 2 to 3 a month, is probably a great place to start to ramp it up. Because again, in this time, if you're only doing one a month, you get 12 bites at the apple here. Whereas your competition is pelting. They are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially on Facebook ads, right, or mobile ads to reach these same people. So you want to actually be a little more present with them. And again, is it compelling? Does it feel like a friend, or, a concerned fellow citizen, or is it like some super boring, like the kind of thing that feels like a nuisance? Would you want to receive this content?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Great question. Was there another question? Yeah, we've got one here.
I have a question about this slide. Is there a reason for why the statistics are such? Is there a reason why we have households who make less than 30,000, or, I mean, because that would help us understand how to message and what the messaging could be if we understand why these statistics are what they are.
Sure. So part of it is, sorry, I'm losing my voice. I'll try to make it through. Yeah, part of it is a demographic issue, right, where you've got younger people or minority people who may not have access to a desktop, right? So they're texting more. That's how they're, they're not emailing each other. They might not be chatting each other in the same way, right? On GChat, they're using texting because that's the ready thing that they have, right? Part of it is also, we talked about they're younger. They are, less likely to be white, and that's just behavior. What we've seen in terms of millennials, moms, and minorities is that, they want to text, they want to communicate with each other, over that medium because it's convenient, right? It's very convenient and it's intimate. They know that someone's going to pick it up. With an email, your email could get lost, right? In the shuffle and for, some people in the 30,000 a year range, email's not really a part of their life. For a lot of folks, email is part of their professional existence. And then, oh, by the way, I also have a personal email. If you're a plumber, right? You don't necessarily need, or you work for BART, what do you need email for, right? Like you're going to communicate in a different way, with those folks. So, that's a little more of like a psychographic, but that's part of what this trend is about. Like partly it's because younger people, make less money, right? And so, they are more likely to text because they grew up doing that. Right, but also, it's as much a function as just, the shift in society as well. And, those folks making over $75,000 a year, often being older, being whiter, and also using other platforms to communicate with each other. That's a great question. Yeah, question in the back.
Just want to quickly share, I used to use the phone to send out the text messages. It's 20 at a time. And my new staff, he did something with Google Voice, and he was using the email and sending it out to hundreds.
Yeah,
people don't see each other's cell phone number that way.
Exactly. I think that it's partly a generational thing. Exactly. But there are great tools like Hustle, Relay, Mobile Commons, where some of this comes from, that either help you create a digital program that looks like, what you would use on a desktop, but for mobile, right? That's fairly sophisticated, and gives you numbers, gives you tracking, allows you to send links, surveys, etc. Or Hustle and Relay are about peer-to-peer, which I think for you guys is actually really important to consider, right? Where, what you want to do is ultimately, get people sending text messages on your, to each other about this and tracking that, that information through those tools. So here is a great strategy that from one of our clients, Define American. Define American was started by Jose Antonio Vargas. I see you remember Jose is an old friend of mine, but Pulitzer Prize winner by day, undocumented immigrant by night. And so he created this in part with a little bit of help from us back in the day, Define American, to really highlight the everyday Americans who are undocumented immigrants. And so, in partnership with CNN, when they had their documentary, Jose's documentary documented, they were trying to have a premiere, but they invited 38 partners to host watch parties, but all of that was driven via text messaging because they were trying to reach a specific audience that they knew were much more likely and were going to be more receptive to text messages about this than any other form. Hugely successful for them. So, when we talk about their texting strategy, they had a pledge, where they asked people to, text the word pledge to say that they were going to watch the video and then share it with their friends. You want to create a stream of content, and you, to a certain extent, you can automate this, right? You can automate, like, okay, if they do this, then they're going to get this message. If they do this, then they'll get this message to ask them to do another thing, right? But also making it feel really personal, right? Making it feel like and adding links. So this is what, a sophisticated text messaging engagement program can start to look like. Let's talk about Facebook. Facebook is still a thing. Lots of people are using Facebook. It is true that the people who now use Facebook, the age is shifting upward for sure. Younger people, for a lot of different reasons, are moving towards Instagram. Those of you, I know you guys are here in the Bay Area, so you know that Facebook owns both Instagram and Facebook. A lot of people don't know that, though. You'd be surprised that people are like, wait, what? But at any rate, let's talk about Facebook, because Facebook, for I would say 98% of the organizations that we audit, it's in one of their top 3 referrers of traffic to their site. Facebook is actually a very important search engine and search optimization opportunity for you. So if you don't already have a Facebook page, launch one. Make sure you're linking to your website from that Facebook page. You'd be surprised how much traffic that starts to bring in. But in terms of how else can you drive traffic to your site, you want to use what's called the Facebook Business Manager to have ads. Again, ads can be relatively low cost. You can boost high-performing content with $50 and reach 100, 1,000 times more people than you would just by trying to do it organically. Create different versions and see which ones people like best, and then focus more dollars on the content that's performing well, shut off the stuff that isn't, and then make sure that you are reviewing your insights and your business manager ad analytics. We had a request from one of your fellow folks to say, look, it's great that you're telling me to look at Facebook insights and analytics, but I don't know what I'm looking at. And this is actually a common issue. Just because, again, those tools, those dashboards were not built for you, okay? They were built for corporate marketers, period. And so you're not supposed to feel comfortable in there. It's built for people who have a lot of sophisticated training and know what they're looking for. And so, one thing that we could potentially do is, have a workshop where we really, roll our sleeves up and try to help you understand, okay, here's the Facebook analytics dashboard, your insights, your business manager. What are the stats that you need to pick out from here and observe that are most important for you, for what you're trying to do? Looking at Twitter, also still, while it is growing at a slower rate than, say, Instagram, it's still really important, particularly for grass tops activists, for other organizations, and for media. So you want to look at hashtags, right? We've already talked about this. I was actually just at, as I mentioned to some of you, the Nonprofit Technology Conference in Portland the past couple of days, and there's a video, for me that, is all about how video is really important. I did a session on that. You want to tag and mention, tag equals mention, people in orgs. Keep it light, keep it fun, use emojis, right? Use emojis. Let me tell you a quick story. We actually worked with the Walmart workers as they were, starting their campaign to get more respect. This is back in 2012, and so a large union that was trying to help support the Walmart workers and getting a fair wage came to us and said, hey, can you analyze what's happening now and give us a digital strategy? And when we actually did the research, what we came back to them was like, look, this is what they're sharing. Cats. They interpret these really tough issues because they are really tough issues, like having losing a baby because your boss won't give you a break, right? Or getting injured and or having different types of shifts that eliminate your ability to have childcare, right? Those are tough issues. The way that they would talk about those issues with each other and in terms of organizing to get a better shake from Walmart was using cat memes. We're like, look, this isn't a thing to try to change. You got to lean in. You need to share more cats. This is what they want. Cats, do it. And they did, to their credit. They're like, okay. They didn't say like, oh, that wouldn't be professional, like, oh, but this is really serious. And so we've got to, try to encourage them to be, we have to just give them some facts and some charts. And that wasn't where the workers were, and that wasn't how they were talking and sharing and organizing amongst themselves. And so, I would encourage you to lighten it up by a lot, okay? If you really want people to absorb, share it, feel like you're really talking to them as people and not, as a, inhuman, faceless machine, spitting out factoids to them. I'm just suggesting. Try to move to DM. DM means direct message. It's a way that you can send a private message in Twitter, for those of you who aren't aware, to try to encourage folks to collaborate with you, especially your top followers or top influencers that you've identified. And then again, make sure you're actually looking in the analytics, in your stats, to figure out what is and isn't working. Let's talk about Instagram. So there's a lot here as well. Of course, we've talked about, how important it is with young people, with those, who may not, again, be, listening to, Fox News or MSNBC every day, all day. And of course, there's a high, it very much over-indexes with people of color. So for those of you trying to reach the hard to count, a good place to invest a little more energy. Here, image, color, all of that is really important. Energy, right? Like this probably looks different than some of the content, if you have an Instagram account, than you're putting out. Am I right? Yeah, okay. So, you want to use some fun colors and styles. Speak with cultural relevance. You want to, again, hashtags are critically important on Instagram to get your content in front of a larger group of people. Again, make sure that you're tagging and mentioning other people and orgs. Make sure you're commenting. Comments are a big deal on Instagram, and you can actually, that's a place where you can insert links, where you can add information. Instagram, it's not just broadcast, there's an active dialogue going on. And again, emojis are going to be your friend. YouTube, an underlooked, very important platform. It is, if not beyond Google. And again, YouTube is owned by Google. I know you guys know this, but you'd be surprised how many people don't know this. It is, if not, it is, after Google, one of the biggest search engines on the internet, and therefore critical to your search engine optimization. What I can tell you is that the forces that want to discourage people from using the census are all up in YouTube. Okay, like they are putting in videos, they are tweaking, you can use hashtags there as well, they are tweaking the language so that they bubble up when someone searches census or census citizenship. Are you being competitive, right? When someone is adding keywords that are relevant to your area. So, again, we've talked about a lot of this already, using your phone to create quick videos. It doesn't have to be fancy. In fact, the less fancy in some ways, the better. You want to make sure you're adding some branding with your intro and your outro. There are some very cheap, easy video editors that don't require any tech skills, that make it really, like Fastery is a great one. Crello is a good one. We've actually got a list in the first slide. We didn't have time to get to it, but we can talk more about that. But there's some really great, easy to use video editors at this point that even help you caption. They'll transcribe and caption the videos. That's really important for YouTube, because a lot of times, and you probably do it yourself, you're in a place where you want to watch a video, but you can't have your sound on, right? And so captions, if you don't have captions, you're losing 70% of your audience. Right, for those, yeah, so something to keep in mind. Keep your videos short. I would say certainly under 4 minutes. Under 2 is even better. And again, your supporters, influencers can be a great asset here to help you make videos that might be a little more engaging. Great tool for videos. Gather, it's called Gather Video. It actually allows you to provide talking points, cues, like, center in the frame, because people want to do, your supporters want to do a good job for you. They don't want to screw up the video. So, if you give them a tool, like, hey, here's where and how to get in your video, you'll be surprised, the quality that you'll get from there. So, all of that is important, but you only have so much time in the day, right? You can't necessarily create completely new tools, completely new content. So you want to reuse, recycle, repurpose, right? So you've got images. You can actually use some of the same images or video across different platforms with just tweaks that make it relevant to that platform. So, for example, you can use all of your channels to promote your text messaging platform. You can take the visuals from a video and share a talk as a podcast, right? You can embed your videos in YouTube and then in your selected tweets and create blog posts from those, right? You can take tweets that other people, if people have retweeted or mentioned your hashtag, and then you can retweet those, right? Or share them as like, here are our top 10 tweets of the week from our supporters. People love that. There's lots of ways that you can be creative with your cross promo. And then enjoy the results. Take a look, here's just some, examples from Google Analytics so that you make sure it's installed. It's free. Most of you, it sounds like, have it installed on your platforms, but make sure you go back. If you're not sure, make sure you go back. A, that it is installed, and B, that you have access, right, to look at it. And then, take a look at what's actually happening in there. All right. Any questions? Yes.
So this is a very basic question about using text messaging and getting permission from people.
Mm-hmm.
How explicit do we need to be?
About which part of the text messaging?
About getting their permission before we text them.
Well, right. So great question. So laws vary. And the laws change. But generally speaking, the best way to start is just by asking people. Like, do you have on your website, are you even collecting text message, are you collecting people's cell phones? Are you asking them to share? Are you giving them the opportunity just as they would, say, sign up for our email list? Are you also saying sign up for our text messaging? They're giving you permission in that moment. Are you asking people on other channels? You can ask people on Facebook, hey, we have, as I was just saying with cross promotion, we have a text messaging, would you prefer to get messages there? Here's, text blah to blah, right? So that's people opting in. Now, if you've got a list that you have bought, right, you've done some kind of append of here are the people we know who live in our city, right? Here are their cell phone numbers. Then it's an opt-in, right? Like, hey, we have found you, you've probably received already random text messages, right? And you're like, oh, what is this? You have an opportunity, just like with email, to opt out. And you have to give people that opportunity to say, stop, I don't want to receive these messages.
Okay, so as long as we give them the opportunity to say stop, then we're okay.
Yeah, it's very similar to email that way. Yeah, you got to give them the opportunity to opt out of that. And now, with GDPR, some of you probably know what that is. It's the European standard. Some of that has shifted away from, opt out to opt in. So you're probably safer for now if you're not sure or you want to stay on the safe side. I would lean towards opt in first. But you would be surprised how many, Center for Community Change, a client we're working with now, they have hundreds of thousands of text messages, all of which have been given to them by actual human beings signing up for it. You can get them at events. You can, hey, would you like to sign up for our text? Just collect cell phone numbers that way. You can get cell phone numbers voluntarily from people in a lot of different ways.
And if we get their cell phone numbers because they take a class with us or receive a service from us, we can text them then.
You can text them. They have given permission. Tacitly, essentially, right? Which, by the way, be careful what you sign up for, right? Yeah. Great question. Other questions?
Given that it's the first online census ever, and that we have all these forces that we need to deal with around the dark web and negative messaging. And so this is going to be the hardest census ever. This is going to be a huge lift. And so that is the challenge ahead for us as a group. The good news is that we're going to do this together, that this is truly a team effort. And I think Georgia, I've often heard her say that census is the ultimate collaboration, and I totally agree, because there are a lot of people that need to be cooking in this kitchen and make this delicious meal that we're going to have. So that's the good news. The other thing I want to add is that there are funding opportunities, which I think is very important for you to know. And I wanted to share, this is literally, you're the first group who's getting this information because you're here at this training and we haven't even officially sent any communication out about this. But we are going to be releasing an RFP, a request for proposals, on April 15th with a May 31st deadline. And we will be having information sessions in both of our counties The two primary ones that we're going to be having are on April 24th and the 20th. The one on the 24th will be in San Jose at the Sobrado Center for Nonprofits, and the one on May 20th will be in Redwood City at the Sobrado Center. And we're literally in the middle of finalizing those details. So that's why we haven't actually like sent any communication out about it, but since you're all here, I thought it would be important for you to know. Everyone who attended this training or who signed up for it, we will be emailing all of you this information so that you have it. We will have those trainings also via WebEx, so if you can't physically be present, you can join by WebEx, and we'll also record the info sessions for the RFP, and we'll also post it on our website. So I just wanted to make sure that you know that we're really committed to making sure that this work happens and that nonprofits are involved and that you have funding and the tools that you need to work on digital strategy. Hopefully this training has given you some food for thought about how you can incorporate digital strategy into your work. At the same time, I want to note that we understand there will be other forms of outreach as well. We truly believe that we have to have digital in this current 2020 census because that's going to be critical for a fair and accurate count. But we also know that you're going to do other things, right, as nonprofits. There's going to be face-to-face contact. There's going to be other types of communication that you're going to have and do, and we welcome proposals as well. Do you have any questions before we wrap up?
Well, I know, here, I'll come to the
Oh, and I should also say one more thing. Census is happening on April 1st, 2020. I don't know if we actually, do we say that date?
No, we didn't say
so,
that date.
Yeah, I realized, I'm like, I don't think I should talk about the date. So it's far away, yet also around the corner, right? And that's one of the reasons why we're having the RFP now with the goal of getting the funds and decisions out in August so that you have ample time to know whether you have funding to hire additional staff, to plan, to budget and prepare for the work that's going to come ahead in the year.
No, one thing, Anne, a lot of people ask like, wow, this was hot, can we get more? You know, do you have thoughts or desired ways that where people can give you feedback on this?
Yeah, so a couple things, like we actually wanted to record this training as well, so we're gonna find a way to make sure that if there are other people at your organizations who need to hear, you know, this information, that it gets to you. We'll also be following up via email with the survey about this training, and you can tell us what worked, what could have been improved, and then you can also, there'll be a place there where you can talk about what else you need, what other kind of support you need. So we can consider if there are other types of trainings or offerings that we can provide that will help you in your work. And hopefully this information is not just helpful for Census, but for any other work that you're doing around digital strategy. So I will end by saying thank you to Cheryl and Adriana for all of your work. We're so fortunate to be working with Do Big Things. Just so you know, Cheryl and her team have also been working on the National Census Digital Strategy. So they are so trusted and knowledgeable in this space that our national funders that have been working on census at sort of the bigger level have also brought on Cheryl to help coordinate what's happening with census nationally. So we're really excited that she's also here locally helping us, and thank you so much for all that you put into this. We will be also following up with the slides. I know that hopefully that will be helpful to you as well. So have a wonderful weekend, and thank you for coming.
Thank you for all you do.